Alright, so Megalo. This show was easily one of the frontrunners for the best anime of spring 2018 and was without question my #1 most anticipated series to watch this season. We've discussed this show at length in our podcast, but now I'm going to present my entire summarized thoughts on this show. I love boxing. I box myself, so when it came out, I had about 10 different people be like, dude, you really need to watch this show, and I was so freaking excited. I watched all of Hajime no Ippo last year, freaking loved it, and after seeing the original trailer for this series, my thought was it was going to be like Hajime no Ippo meets Real Steel, and if you haven't watched those two, by the way, you really should. They're fantastic. They had really good stories behind them, emphasizing the classic underdog tale, toppling adverse opponents repeatedly, and rejuvenating the spirit of the viewer through projection onto the main character. That, coupled with the animation quality reminiscent of Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo in the trailers, gave Megalo a perfect storm of advantages to have. The promotional artwork was some of the highest quality that I've seen from media recently, which really spoke to me in the effort that the production studio took to make sure that this show was being done right and to the full extent of its capability, so I admired them for that. Now, Megalo is a hallmark 50th year anniversary for the manga Ashita no Joe, which I have not read just for clarity so that I have nothing to compare this show to in terms of source material, and nor have I read the accompanying manga that began in February of this year. But I wholeheartedly believe that as a medium, an anime series should be able to divulge the entirety of its story in one form without needing to turn to additional resources for remaining points to be made clear. Alright, on to the punchy punch. When the show started, I could not have been more thrilled. I was eagerly anticipating the first episode on my bed with joyful glee like a kid on Christmas as I logged into Crunchyroll to watch. Immediately I was sold on this show. The style of animation, the gritty artwork, masterpiece. I loved it. For the first 3 episodes, my eyes were glued to my computer, locked into place. And now this is where things started to get a little iffy for me, so I'm just going to start and break this down real quick into some subcategories. Megalo is really well animated. I think that's something that can't really be debated. It yields a very gritty feel through a comprehensive background that emphasizes and reinforces the atmosphere and tone of the show. The movements of the characters are detailed, crisp, and well drawn. Ironically, the only time I noticed significant dips in the animation quality were during the fight scenes, specifically the fight with Aragaki, aka the Butterfly Dude, which is pretty counterintuitive to a show that focused very heavily on its aesthetic to draw people in. The movement during the fight scene felt really stiff and rigid, de-emphasizing the fluid movement that had been exhibited prior to the show up to this point. However, it picked back up shortly after, specifically the fight with Yuri and Iglesias the Spider later on in the show, which in my opinion was far too short. Now, this certainly doesn't kill a show, but when a large portion of the appeal to the show is its visual prowess, dips in animation quality tend to weigh a little bit more heavily as opposed to shows that don't demonstrate that same level of artistic quality. The OST for this show was pretty fantastic, I'd say, and it really added to the vibe of the show, and a link to the full OST opening and ending will be posted below if anybody is interested. It was really hype when it needed to be, and it wasn't when it didn't. That being said, the opening was really underwhelming for me, which Howling disagrees with me on, but hey, this is my review, so fight me IRL. The ending was pretty forgettable for me as well, and didn't sway my opinion on the show one way or the other. In short, the music did its job for me, so that's where I'll leave that.
Respect. Respect for one's elders shows character.
I have character.
Because you are a character doesn't mean that you have character.
The characters introduced in this show were some of the most likable and root-forable. Is that a word? I'm going to pretend that's a word. Characters that I've ever seen. It builds bonds between many of them that are highly impactful and emotional. Joe is fantastic. I enjoyed seeing Nanbu's shady nature and internal struggle in his support for Joe. I liked learning about Sachio and seeing what gave him such a determined spirit and heart. I loved watching them rally behind a cause, an attempt to come together and propel Joe forward as a unit, a team. I loved all of that.
One time Randy Beeman's aunt was sitting on the front porch, and she was in her bare feet, and she felt a lick, and she thought it was her dog licking her feet, but it wasn't. It was this crazy guy that did that a lot.
The story structure and narrative display, however, are where the show began to fall apart for me. Megalo developed a small group of ragtag and likable main characters, dislikable villains, and a solid rival that you can respect as an opponent. It takes all of that brilliant characterization, all of the potential depth that we could have had, all of those relationships that could have been built stronger between characters, and kind of tosses it aside in favor of mediocre storytelling. Going to have some spoilers from this point forward, so if that disturbs you, skip ahead or see yourself to an appropriate exit. Joe's gear breaks down really shortly after the show begins, and in the third episode he gets a prototype gear to use, which is an upgrade to his previous gear, and I was crazy excited to see him fight with it. And then that broke too. After that, Joe never uses gear again in a fight. He attempts to repair his original gear, and that goes about as well as a root canal being performed by a drunk dentist using a rake. At the outset, it was cool. It made Joe unique and added that underdog flavor even more by preventing him from using gear. But as the show wore on, we began to see more and more exceptional boxers using exceptional gear. I would say that put Joe at a severe disadvantage, both in his ability to output more powerful punches to his opponents and in the reception of stronger punches from them as well. This made me think that at some point Joe was going to have to be given some better gear or something, but no, instead, Yuri forfeits his gear at the end to fight Joe in combat without gear, which Joe smiled about. He smiled about it. This entire time, Joe wanted to fight the best of the best, at his best, and now he's happy that he has a handicap? Are you kidding me? Joe never wanted to be taken lightly, or for anyone to go easy on him, and yet he smiles? Why? I expected him to feel frustrated, underestimated, angry at the fact that the person that he's been looking forward to fighting for so long voluntarily crippled himself for that match. If that were me, I would have felt so disrespected. Just me? Okay, moving on. The way this is handled, gear is made completely irrelevant in this show. A show that was wholeheartedly advertised on its gear. But Cobalt, you exclaim. This is a more representative of realistic boxing style. This demonstrates how it would really be to feel to be inside of the ring instead of just being some wish fulfillment hard-hitting power fantasy. Yeah, whoa. Let me stop you right there, because I do not care. This show was advertised and flouted as a high-octane, adrenaline-rushing, fast-paced combat anime about a gritty underdog overcoming adversity by using mechanical robot arms to beat the ever-living shit out of his opponents. Realism can kiss my ass. This is an anime. I do not watch this for realism. Suspension of disbelief, people. Of course, if you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, the technology may not work. Of course it has the potential to break bones. Of course this, of course that. But Hajime no Ippo had punches in it that got me on my feet jumping with excitement and was one of the reasons that I got into boxing myself in the first place. So don't tell me that a show where the addition of robot external arms is a key focus of the show couldn't give me at least a few good hits. I wanted moments like that, ones that sucked me in, that drew me to my feet with raw excitement at the epicness of the thing that I was witnessing. I was waiting for that. I was waiting for that for a long time. I got a small taste of it in the fight against Burroughs the Lion, and after that episode was over, I was like, yes, this is what I've been waiting for. And then the next episode was just back to the same. Nothing got me excited, no pulse pounding, no heart throbbing, no nothing. I was honestly, and quite regretfully, a little bored. And the main issues that I found with this is that there were a plethora of solutions that you could have gone with to resolve this issue. For example, whenever Joe defeats Shirato, why didn't Shirato give his gear to Joe? Shirato was an engineer, not a boxer, an engineer. Joe would have been an ideal candidate for using his AI-enhanced gear, and is already opposing his sister, so why not go with that anyway? The way the story played out, it just felt rushed, unpolished, and a lot left that was untold. Oh, and why even bring up the weakness that Shirato's gear had against Joe if he was just going to fix it before it was even exploited? It makes zero sense. Just extra dialogue and intrigue to make us think that there was some advantage that Joe had over Shirato, when in reality there was no change in status quo whatsoever. Then, there's the cutting into the middle of a fight. Megalo is a perfect example of tell, don't show. In the fight to determine if Joe was going to make it into Megalonia, the first round and half of the second were skipped. I actually backed up to the previous episode to see if I had missed the start of the first fight, but nope, I hadn't. They skipped the first round and half of the second one, and I am truly still baffled as to why. No one I've discussed this with thought that this made sense and was just as confused as I was, so at least I know I'm not alone in that regard. And then this happened again in the final fight, no less. The final fight between Yuri and Joe that we have been building up to for the entirety of this series starts a good way into the fight at the beginning of the episode in round 3. And it ends without even letting us know who won. All I'm saying is that in a show about boxing, I saw a whole lot less of it than I was anticipating to. And to clarify, I'm not saying I needed a 3-episode fight like a shonen series, but in a show about boxing, at least show me the whole damn fight. It was like ordering a really nice steak at a restaurant, but the waiter only brings half of it to you. You ask where the other half is. They say it's in the kitchen. You ask if you can have it. They say no, but they boldly reassure you that even though you can't eat it, it's still there, in the kitchen. This series anticipates that its emotional punches, big joke, haha, can be implemented simply with text on a screen. Which brings me to the ending, and oh how bitter am I. We skip to a year later. Yuri is in a wheelchair and Megalonia appears to be all but dead. It's only after the credits roll that we see a small line of text on a black screen that informs us that Joe won his match. It was so matter-of-fact, so inconsequential in its display that it makes me wonder whether the show cared about it at all. It was just thrown in and felt undoubtedly like it didn't matter one way or the other, and that's the problem. It made me feel as though the ending had zero importance, which makes the show feel pointless because the entire goal of the show was to win Megalonia, get out of debt, beat Yuri, etc. And then they just trivialize it to the point of unimportance. It's like being told a report you're doing at work is exceptionally important, only to later discover that the report was barely glanced at before being dismissed. It's infuriating, and quite frankly, I felt cheated out of what I felt could have been an incredibly dynamic finish. I've seen so many people just praising this series left and right, and I really wish I could have felt the way that they did about it. I wanted to like this show. I wanted to love it with every fiber and ounce of my being, and to be able to recommend it to anyone and everyone that was looking for a well-produced, well-told story in an anime. But unfortunately, that's not something I can say. This show was pretty mediocre to me. It left out large chunks of key points that we really needed to see. It wasn't a bad show, but it just definitely didn't live up to its potential. In the end, it was a well-animated, well-produced series that suffered from poor writing with brilliant characterization. In hindsight, however, the flashy, detailed artwork may have just been an attempt to cover up flimsy writing. I wanted to love this show. I wanted it to be so much more. Well, maybe it'll be better at the 100th year anniversary. This is Cobalt from Geek No Bullshit, signing out.